And let me go ahead and share this with you guys. All right, so the last things we're going to go through for today, review the course, and then the final review. So I hope you guys all came with your questions, your concerns, your fears about what's going to show up here on the final for next week. And so we're going to do a kind of quick review, very broad strokes here. When we were talking through Genesis, so I'm going to tell it more like a story, just because it's easier to tell the story that way than it is in separated kind of chunks of facts. And so we were introduced to a couple of main characters, one of them being God in Genesis 1, but then also Adam and Eve, who we come to find out are created in the image of God that we find in Genesis 1:28. And we talked through the importance of the image of God, of being God's representatives on the earth. We also discussed a couple of different ways through sexual differentiation, through imaging God, whether it be through rationality or communication, but that were made to be representatives of God upon the earth. Yeah, the final's next Thursday at 7:30 a.m. Thank you, Elijah. And so we see that in Genesis 1. But what we quickly come to find out in Genesis 3, after again Genesis 1 and 2, this resounding declaration about God's singular uniqueness amongst creation, and how we see this dual image of God in Genesis 1 and 2. We talked about how in Genesis 1, how God is transcendent. He's separate from creation. He's not a created being like other gods or created beings in the ancient Near East. How God is singularly creator over all the heavens and the earth. He doesn't have to procreate in order for creation to come about. He doesn't have to kill or go to war with other deities for creation to come about. He simply speaks and it happens. And then Genesis 2, how God is intricately and intimately connected in and with creation, most specifically with humankind. How he forms man from the earth, how he breathes air in his lungs, how he places the man in the garden for him to work, and how Yahweh sees that the man's loneliness is not good, and how he then builds the woman from the rib, taking him from his side, and then brings the two together. So again, we see these dual images of God, and bringing the two together about what the Old Testament, specifically in Genesis, is trying to say about both God's transcendence, that God is separate, apart from creation, distinct, probably is the better word, he's distinct from creation, and that he's immanent. He's close by, he's interactive, he's relational, deeply relational. And this thus kind of characterization of transcendence and immanence plunges us forward into Genesis 3, where we see humans, because of their desire to be like God, not to be God-like, but to be like God in being autonomous, self-ruling, engage in sin, or what we better call rebellion. And so we see this brokenness that happens in relationship with God, with one another, and then with the earth. And how then the humans are exiled from the earth, or exiled from Eden, are now to wander the earth, which happens with Cain and Abel. After Cain and Abel, we see violence spread throughout the earth, and then God being so grieved that he has to start all over with what we call Tehom, which leads us to a Noahic covenant of God's promising of never doing that to the earth again, or uncreating the world through chaos. Again, God's promise to not destroy the earth with water again. But after Noah, we're introduced to the first of the patriarchs with Abraham, and then introduced to those Abrahamic covenants, Genesis 12, 15, and 17. And these are going to what would be on the final, as a heads up. What two covenants we have? We also have a kind of covenant with creation. It's just that covenant is seen as kind of more interpretive in general. There's not necessarily a specific action that designates this, this is a covenant, or alluding to a covenant. But the two more obvious ones that are going to be drawn upon are Noahic covenant and Abrahamic. And the kind of easy way to remember where they're at is if you think about it, if you kind of go alphabetically, so Genesis, Exodus, Abrahamic, Noahic, AN, and then if you say, I mean, because M comes after N, but if you say Sinai covenant, that's an Exodus. So Abraham, Noah, Sinai, Abraham, Noah, Sinai, Abraham, Noah, Sinai. So you kind of go in alphabetical order. First two are in Genesis. The last one, that's in Exodus. And Deuteronomy as well. But in Deuteronomy, it's more considered Mosaic covenant. And that's just related to the 10 Commandments. So then we're also introduced to Isaac and Jacob, the other two patriarchs. Again, the theme when we talk about what role does sex have in the Genesis narrative, it's how these children are born. Again, Isaac, son of promise, the promise is fulfilled through procreative activities. Same thing happens with Esau and Jacob. Procreative activities lead to their miraculous births. So that's how, in one of the ways that the Genesis narrative makes sense of sex within its context, is that it's how not only the patriarchs are born, but it's how these promises reach their fulfillment. It's through, again, the procreative activities that make life happen. And then the Joseph story. The Joseph story moves us from the land of Canaan down into Egypt. So there's a question on there that asks, where do the patriarchs start? And it starts with here with Abraham, because when Abraham is from the of the Chaldeans, and that's where Yahweh meets him. So it might say Babylon or it might say but both of them are the same place. Is just a specific city in Chaldea, or what we call Babylon. So where does it start? It starts over here in or Babylon, and then it ends over here in Egypt with Jacob in chapter 50. The people going down into Egypt because of famine. So Exodus, what Exodus introduces to is another character, Pharaoh. We have him here at the start. Okay, is the slide still not moving? Yeah,
it moved for me.
Oh, sorry, Mr.
Are we supposed to be on Exodus? Or
yeah, I'm on Exodus right now. I jumped over to Exodus. There you go. Yeah, is like you are. So again, you might see either one on the quiz, or Babylon. But is the more specific answer. You're gonna want to know that. But also know that is in Babylon or Chalcedon or Chaldea. All right, so we're introduced to Pharaoh in chapter 1, and again we come to find out that there's a broken covenant, a broken relationship between Pharaoh and Joseph, and thus kicks off much of the oppression that the Hebrews experience down in Egypt. We're introduced to the characters of Shiphrah and Puah, who are the rebels who preserve the Hebrew babies. And then we come to find out that through preservation of these Hebrew babies, one of them is named Moses, who becomes a liberator of the people of Israel. The liberator of the people of Israel. In Exodus 3, it's there that we're introduced to the name Yahweh, this is where we run into what we call the tetragrammaton. Tetragrammaton. That's just a really long, fancy word for four-lettered word. And I had talked about how YHWH is God's name because they dropped the vowels, but we decided to be brats and fill it in to try to figure it out. But that YHWH is the tetragrammaton. Let me go ahead and put that in the chat here for you guys. And that's God's name revealed to Moses in Exodus 3. Again, something else that's going to be on your final. Um, God's name that is revealed to Moses in Exodus 3. Again, integrally tied to Yahweh's liberation of the people from the hand of Pharaoh. And that's really, really important for us to know, not just for this final, but as you guys move into Kings and Prophets and other Bible classes that you take about how God's name is integrally linked within this Exodus event and why in the prophets you will see this calling back to covenant again and again and again and again. And this phrase, I am the Lord or I am Yahweh, is a specific kind of reminder of this event that bound Israel and Yahweh together. And so, again, God's name and this Exodus event are integrally linked together, serving as this reminder of what Yahweh's done to deliver his people for the purposes of covenant relationship. And so I should have put it on here, but we talked through the 10 plagues, the kind of 10 judgments against the gods interpreted, which culminates in this Passover event or death of the firstborn, and then the actual Exodus event itself in Exodus 15. We talked through the 10 words commandments, also known as the Mosaic or Sinai covenant. Again, those two are interchangeable. Mosaic or Sinai covenant, those are interchangeable. And immediately during the honeymoon, we have the golden calf incident, where because the people think Moses is just taking too dang long on the side of that mountain, Aaron goes ahead and builds him a calf, and they begin to worship the calf as Yahweh. After purifying the camp, if you will, there's some bloodshed for that. God sets up camp in the midst of the tabernacle. Again, this desire for God to be present with his people finds one of its initial glimpses here in the tabernacle, where those images that we saw in Genesis are alluded to here in tabernacle by God again being present with his people. Is Jehovah a name of God? Is it mentioned in the text? That's the name I always hear when people ask what God's name is. Response is usually Jehovah. So Jehovah is a German version of Yahweh. Germans don't have a Y or a W. Um, and yeah, it is a rough translation. The Germans conjoined Adonai and Yahweh together, and that's what they came up with. Except again, German doesn't have a J or a W, so they just put a J and a V. Um, but in reality, we really don't know what it is. And that's largely due to dropping off vowels and whatnot. You're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, especially as the predominance of German in a lot of countries. But I mean, the same thing happened in Latin-speaking countries where they say Yehovah.
Yeah, well, a lot of modern English is taken from Old German or
Yeah,
Old Norse because, long story short, people from England called the Anglo-Saxons were originally from Germany, and then when the Normans came, they were from France. English and modern English kind of evolved from a blending of those two.
yeah. And then they decided to throw in some Latin and Greek, which jacked everything up. So, yeah, English is a weird language. Anybody, random question, but anybody taking BLE next semester in the fall? I think most of y'all are already done with it, but I just thought to ask. All right. Well, if not, I'll be teaching it next semester. So if you want to take BLE all over again as an elective, it'd be a great time. Great use of electives. Um, so let's go ahead and continue through. The only reason I brought that up was because we talked through the weirdness of English, and just how if you add one letter, it just changes the whole pronunciation of the word, which is weird, but that's because of derivatives. But anyway, but Leviticus. So we talked through and talked about offerings and the various offerings that are given to God, various offerings that are given to priests. We mentioned Aaron's priesthood, the inauguration of the priesthood, that mediative body of people who serve as the kind of conduits of representation between God and the people, or on people on behalf, or on to God on behalf of the people. We have spent a good amount of time talking about Day of Atonement and how Yahweh provides the means. Professor McCracken, she's awesome. Yeah, she's awesome. Um, Super cool. We talked through Day of Atonement with how Yahweh's providing the means for reconciled relationship. One of the easy ways to remember what atonement is or does is at one meant. Some of you might know that, but at one meant. But again, the providing the possibility for reconciliation between God and his people, made possible one through the offerings, and then more specifically through Day of Atonement. That again, God gives the people a way to deal with the things that get in the way between people and God, and people with one another, and people with the earth. A day for purification from sin. The pollution that has infested the land has now been dealt with and washed away. The things that have corrupted and defiled have now been have dealt with and been washed away. And that's all of what atonement provides, not just for the people with God, but again, people with one another, and how the restoration of relationships is across the board. Then we talked about with the holiness code and the care for the poor, widows, and orphans that comes up here in Leviticus, and how this kind of differentiation between Israel and the surrounding nations is for the purposes of them knowing that Yahweh, that there's a God in Israel, and defining holiness not just as being set apart, but being distinct in the midst of. Holiness as distinction and not just a kind of moral superiority or moral purity. There is components of that. There are components of that, but more often than not, the overwhelming imagery that holiness has is one of distinction and uniqueness in the midst of, especially for Israel and their calling among the nations. And we talked through numbers and this census, this numbering of the people. That kind of I had mentioned how in Israel that there's a war camp as they're kind of camped out in this kind of cross shape with Yahweh in the middle. You have tribes to the north, the south, the east, and the west. And this census is a number of if we can put it this way, the number of the soldiers that are a part of this kind of war camp as they're about to march into the promised land. You have this cloud of fire, or you have this cloud by day and then a pillar of fire by night that is guiding the people in the wilderness. And then until we have rebellion go down. And we had talked almost ad nauseum about the rebellion that happens in the wilderness pertaining to food, to water, to shade, and how this rebellion eventually in Numbers 14 brings about the prohibition of the people being allowed to enter into the promised land. We talked about 40 years for 40 days of negative reports, 40 years for 40 days of negative reports. And how finally in Numbers 20, Moses is prohibited from entering into the promised land. Why? Because he decided to hit the rock instead of talking to it, and talking to the people ends up getting him frustrated. He lashes out and ends up disobeying or rebelling. And then Numbers ends with this kind of threefold blessing from Balaam, having been employed by Balak, Moabite leader, tribal chief, king, we might say. But we still see God's continued presence and faithfulness demonstrated to Israel here, just even despite the rebellion. Even despite the rebellion, God shows himself faithful in this Balaam narrative. And then Deuteronomy, that for this new generation, the first generation that died in the wilderness, for this new generation, that to have the recalling of the covenant history of what their parents had gone through as a kind of warning for them to bring them up to speed in what God was desiring for them. That you have these 10 commandments or words given to them in Deuteronomy 5, this command to love the Lord, this ultimate demonstration of loyalty or devotion given to Yahweh. And then the giving of this second law. We talked about how it's laid out as a suzerain vassal treaty, and how Yahweh, the suzerain, the one in power, is offering a covenant commitment to these people, the vassals, that if they were to keep their commitments, Yahweh is going to keep his, which is to bring them into a land of milk and honey, to bless them richly, which is where those blessings and curses come from. But if they don't, then we talked about at length last class about what would happen, including the curses that would fall upon them, specifically related to injustice. And should the people participate in idolatry and injustice, then they would suffer a curse. And what that curse looked like was exile. And that's really, really, really important. That so much of the curses look like exile. And then we had ended with talking about the death of Moses. The death of Moses, and how with the death of Moses comes the end of an era for Israel as they're about to enter into the promised land. So, and there's still hope. There's still hope for Israel that when they get into the promised land, that they'll obey, be inheritors of all these blessings that God desires to give to them, should they continue in obedience. But we'll see. We'll see. And you guys will talk about that in Kings and Prophets. Are there any questions, comments, concerns about this so far? From any of these five: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Any open questions that you might have in general? Just to kind of open it up here at the end. All right. Well, let's go ahead. Well, there's a question here. Can we ask questions about the final? Thank you for that beautiful segue, Elijah. So, all right, whatever questions you guys have from your final, go ahead, unmute yourself, throw them in the chat, fire them off however you'd like. We'll spend the next however long you guys want on these questions. So. All right, don't hesitate. Don't get shy now. And again, the question you have, somebody else probably has. What's up?
How many genealogies are in the book of Genesis?
There are 9. Technically 11, but 9.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I think on the final you're gonna see 11 on the final. So it's technically 9, but you're gonna see 11. So 11. Put 11. If you put 11, it's the right answer. What time is the final? 7:30 on Thursday. Is there a question about the 10 Commandments? I don't know. You tell me. If it's on the study guide, it's on there. What is the Decalogue, and which chapter of Exodus can it be found? Did you have a question about that, Alberto? Number 4 on the study guide.
Oh, when did you talk about the Shema?
The Shema. I
The
talked
Shema.
about. Yeah, I talked about it when we talked in Deuteronomy 6. But real quick, and I'll get to your question. I'll get to your question right now, Sequoia. But so Shema equals to here. Hebrew. Specifically, where you'll find it is in Deuteronomy 6, where it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." And the link between the two, between hearing and obedience, is that one has heard when they've obeyed. And the demonstration of obedience, again, demonstrates a kind of hearing that somebody's heard. Again, which kicks off this whole section of you're going to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And so, again, that it's both an allusion to hear who God is and then a call to obedience. And what is the suzerain vassal treaty? Let me go ahead and pull that up on the PowerPoint here. I should have it on here. Let me see. There we go. Okay, so if you go over to Pentateuch week 7, session 1, you'll find it on the 18th slide. There's suzerain vassal treaties, common contracts between parties of different powers. Contracts between parties of different powers. Suzerain is the one with the power, and the vassal is the one often without, or at least with lesser power than the suzerain. And then here's the basic structure that you find for it. How does it relate to the 10 Commandments? Well, there you go. Yahweh, the suzerain, who delivers the preamble to Moses, who's the vassal. You have the names and titles, Lord your God, historical prologue. You have the stipulations, which are the 10 words. And then you have blessings and curses. So again, Pentateuch week 7, session 1. You'll find that. Difference between apodictic and casuistic law. So apodictic law is once and for all time kind of laws that they're forever binding. So stuff like you will have no other idols before me. There is no situation in which having an idol is going to be okay. Other situations that are going to change are dependent. So that's apodictic. Casuistic is very much conditional or contextual. And so again, you're not supposed to, so there's this condition where you're not going to commit adultery. But if you have a brother, or if you have a sister-in-law whose your brother died, then you have this obligation to fulfill your commitment to ensure that your brother's family line goes on. And so that's one of the ways in which you'll see kind of casuistic law. Apodictic, once and for all time. Casuistic, situational. And so again, if you want to think about it that way, that there's no, for the most part, most of the 10 Commandments are apodictic. There are some certain consequent or conditions that kind of make loopholes, but for the most part, those are apodictic. Most of what we find in a lot of cases, specifically to like afterwards in Exodus, like if one of your animals falls into a ditch, or if you kill if you kill your neighbor's animal, then you owe him this. But if you only harm it, then you owe him this. And so those are the kind of situations that are casuistic. Sorry, can you say what apodictic is again? I was writing. Apodictic are laws that are once and for all time. Laws like, again, you're not going to have any idols. You're not going to kill anybody. And then casuistic is more conditional, situational. How much is the final? 20%. Got to make it hurt. Hebrew title for Leviticus, Vayikra. And he called. That says Vayikir. I don't know why I did that.
Are all the names for the are all the Hebrew names listed like in the slides?
Always in the introductions. Always in the introductions. All right. Any other questions? The difference between holiness and purity. Let me go ahead and go over to Leviticus. So when we had talked about, do we need another English phrase too? Are you talking about like the English transliteration? Yeah, no, just Hebrew. The original language of Jesus. When we had talked about holiness specifically in Leviticus, one of the things we had talked about there is again holiness as uniqueness. And what purity relates to is more a lack of pollution. Did we spend a whole week talking about that? Or defilement. Let me see where I could find that at. Let me. Okay. So see, I did. Okay. So again, with holiness and purity, holiness relates more so towards distinction or uniqueness, whereas purity relates to being. There's a couple different ways we can put it. So we had talked about how sin pollutes or causes impurity, and so again, holiness is a distinction, while purity relates to being unblemished, undefiled, free from kind of blemishes or purity, free from blemishes or pollution.
You say holiness is like is specifically though like a distinction
Uniqueness.
or a or a uniqueness,
Yeah.
like in this case specifically from God's people to the world around them.
Yeah. I mean, God is also described as being holy as well. Just again, most of the time it does not have the kind of implications. So purity, that's that. Um, when we talk about uh, um, a kind of moral superiority, being free from sin, not doing bad things, like that more has to do with purity than it does holiness. Because again, one of the consequences of sin, we find Leviticus again, is pollution. It pollutes relationships, it pollutes the land, and then it reinvites chaos. And so it's in that ways that it starts becoming more chaotic again, thrusting the world back into a chaotic state. Um, but what Leviticus is meant to deal with again is to remove the pollution that has now invaded the relationship that's caused a separation between God and his people. which sacrifices were eaten and which ones were not. Let me go ahead and pull up that slide for you guys. Okay. Let me see if I can find it here. Let me see. So you have all of them. Let me see. Why can't I find it? There you are. So all of them but the burnt offering are eaten. So grain offering, fellowship offering, sin offering, guilt offering, those 4 are eaten. And then but the burnt offering, the whole thing was given over to God. Everything multiple choice. Yeah. Yeah. So for that question, you'll see which sacrifice was not to be eaten, and you'll see the 5 of them on there. Festivals of free offerings. Yeah. Yeah. And so they're the 5 we had mentioned in Leviticus. So burnt offering, grain offering, peace offering, sin offering or purification, and then a guilt offering. Primordial history, Genesis 1 through 11. What are the differences between the Decalogues? We had talked about that a couple weeks ago, and it was most specifically dealing with Sabbath regulations. One of them in Exodus, the reasons for Sabbath in Exodus, and then the reasons for Sabbath in Deuteronomy, and how Exodus looks towards the creation narrative, and Deuteronomy is looking towards the Exodus narrative. And so that's really the biggest difference is regulations regarding the Sabbath or reasons for the Sabbath. And so, yeah, primordial history, that's Genesis 1 through 11. And also when you're asked what's the structure, there's 2 parts to it. You have the primordial history and then the ancestral history. So Genesis 1 through 11, primordial, Genesis 12 through 50. That's the ancestral history. The freebie for nobody that asked. How do they relate to each other? That's a good question. Well, Genesis 12 through 50 builds on the narrative from Genesis 1 through 11, teasing out a lot of the theological foundations of what's found here. So Yahweh, as creator of the heavens and the earth, is also creator of covenants and of his people in Genesis 12 through 50. And that's one of the more specific ones that gets brought over between the two. But everything from human relationships and the conflict that's embedded within human relationships, like brothers, you see that with Cain and Abel. You also see that happen again with Jacob and Esau. You see that with Joseph and his brothers. And so the tense family relationships that now mark humanity's relationships with one another. You also have the presence of barrenness, that you have a barren earth, that there's not that there's nothing, but that just that the created elements are not put in order in such a way that creates life. And so that same theme of barrenness and Yahweh coming to create out of barrenness also happens all throughout Genesis 12 to 50. First with Sarai, then with Rebecca, and then with Rachel. What week was that? 2 and 3. What role does sex play in moving the story of Genesis? I had mentioned this earlier, but specifically, it's how God's the promises that God makes. It's how they come to pass. So I'm going to bless you and make you father of many nations to Abraham. He first starts with being able to procreate, and then have Isaac, and then Isaac gives birth. Isaac and Rebecca give birth to Jacob and Esau. Which again, through Jacob, that's how you have the birth of the 12 tribes. So what sex does is that again, it becomes the means through which God's promises are fulfilled. Theological message of Genesis: the Yahweh is creator. Yahweh is the only creator. I believe the way it's phrased is that Yahweh is relational deliverer and Yahweh is relational creator. That's one of the ways that you're going to see it brought up. Is that Yahweh is both relational, he's immanent, and that he's also transcendent, or that he's creator. You're going to see the two being brought together. The Yahweh is both immanent, transcendent, or creator and relational. All right, other questions? Other questions? What are the festivals of Leviticus 23? Let me go ahead and open that up on that slide. I just had it open too. So more often than not, what you're going to be asked is which one of these is not a festival. And so you'll see Sabbath, Passover, unleavened bread. Again, celebrated on the same day. First fruits, weeks, trumpets, Day of Atonement, and then booths. I believe booths is the last one that'll round us out. Yeah. So you'll find them all there kind of outlined at the top. Sabbath, there's a feast. First fruits, when they bring in their harvest crop, they harvest their crops, they party. Weeks. Again, more grain offerings, 7 weeks. And then you have meat being offered as well. More harvesting. Seventh month, the kind of commemoration of that time. Day of Atonement, it's another feast. And then booths, again, remembering the wandering in the wilderness. They just got they want a lot of reasons to party, and they can sit around and eat, and hang out, talk. All right. Anybody else? All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, if there are no more no questions, you guys are free to go. If you guys still have questions, I'll be around for another 10 minutes or so. Hopefully, you guys still have chances to take a nap. Differences between Decalogue and Exodus and Deuteronomy. Reasons for Sabbath. Um, Exodus looks to Genesis and creation, and then Deuteronomy is looking to Exodus with the Exodus event, and that's really the biggest difference between the two. There's Sabbath regulation and reason. And so if you guys have any more questions, I'll be here for another 10 minutes, hanging out for a while. If not, you guys have a beautiful, beautiful Thursday. Again, the final next week at 7:30 a.m. Final is next week at 7:30 a.m., the crack of dawn for most of us, if not all of us. So you guys have an absolutely beautiful weekend as well. Get some rest, take a nap. Thursday. Yep. Thursday, 7:30 a.m. So, and again, as a reminder, late work can be turned in all the way through next Friday at 11:59 p.m. So if you haven't gotten it in, please do so, especially if you're missing quizzes or surveys. You're going to want to make sure to get those in as soon as possible. And so, again, as another reminder, real quick, for those of you that maybe weren't here on Thursday or just zoned out, if we're able to get our responses into the course evaluations above 80%, then we'll everybody gets extra credit. The whole assignment's worth of extra credit. So again, if you haven't taken it yet, please do so. If you have taken it, but you know the other people that haven't, or at least ask other people in class that they have or not yet, and again, just encourage to get your feedback. It's really important for me as a professor to get your feedback, and really important for us as a school to be able to continue to do what not just do what we do, but also improve what we're doing for the sake of other students that are coming right behind you guys. So we need your feedback. I want your feedback. It lets me know how I'm doing and what things can I improve moving forward. And so I need you guys to do it. So just go ahead and again, it'll take all of 5, maybe 10 minutes to get it done. And so Then plus, it's a stupid easy way to get extra credit. So again, that being said, if you guys don't have any more questions, you're free to go. If you do, again, I'll be sticking around for a while. So, all right, you guys have a good Thursday. Let's go Lakers playing those Clippers.
Thank you, Mister.
Hey, you got it. You got it. What is the year of Jubilee? Let me go ahead and pull that up real quick.
Professor,
Yeah.
I know this is probably a dumb question, but are most of the answers to the study guide mainly on the PowerPoint, or is it like through homework,
Yeah.
lectures?
Yeah. It's kind of littered throughout everywhere, but it's mostly on the PowerPoints because I just wanted to make sure that you guys were being tested on
Okay.
stuff we actually talked about.
Okay, thank you.
You got it. All right. So real quick for Jubilee. So Jubilee's over here in week 9, session 2. You'll see here that is a Jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You shall only eat what the field produces. In this year, you shall return each one of you to your property. When you make a sale to neighbor from neighbor, you shall not cheat one another. And so really what this whole thing has to do with, if you read it through, it just has a lot of returning property, and second, the release of debts. So again, year of Jubilee is every 50 years that they would be releasing debts, the release of debts. So property goes back to its owners, slaves are let go, are set free, money that's owed, that's canceled. So, all right.
When it says identify the parts of the tabernacle, how specific is that? Is there's a
Because of the nature of the quiz, that one's not going to be super in depth, and that one actually I probably should have taken off because it's going to be very difficult. Probably what I'm going to be asking for mostly is where the tablets are housed, and those are in the ark, and the ark was in the center.
Okay.
Yeah. Because yeah, usually if it was in the quiz, I'd have like a little map, and you just write like major points. Holy, you write the court, then you write the holy place, then holy of holies. You point where the ark is at, those kinds of things.
And then you said it before, but I didn't get it down. What are the 5 different sacrifices in Leviticus?
5 different sacrifices. They're so burnt offering, guilt offering.
Guilt offering, peace offering.
What was the other one you had said?
Peace offering.
Yeah,
Right?
peace offering. Yeah, and then grain offering.
And that's still 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. Which so you have burnt offering, grain offering, peace
Mhm.
offering. Oh, then sin offering.
Oh, okay, that makes
Purification.
sense.
Yeah, sin or purification offering.
That's like the big one. So
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of feels like the main event a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. What role does love remembrance play in the book of Deuteronomy? It's the way that Israel, it fortifies their allegiance, or put it a different way, it's the way Israel maintains their obedience or maintains their covenant commitment.
Thank you so much.
Of
We'll
course.
see you Saturday at 7:30. And
Yeah.
is the tests due at that time, like from the time period?
No,
It's all day?
no, it'll start at 7:30, and then you guys will get the 24 hours to get it done.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah, you got it. See ya.
You.
You're welcome. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Professor.
Of course, man. You got it.
So I want to say thank you for giving me the extension until June.